Richard Sterling, a titan of industry, arrives at his father's inheritance meeting with his glamorous mistress, Sienna, on his arm, ready to claim his billion-dollar empire. But the family lawyer, a woman of ice, has a secret of her own. She's not just reading a will, she's detonating a bomb. In one sentence, Richard's world shatters, his mistress is humiliated, and a hidden wife no one knew existed is about to inherit everything. This is the story of how a lie unravels. Before we begin, take a moment and comment your city below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from around the world. Now, let's dive in. The rain against the 40th floor windows of Reed and Harrison was a relentless, percussive assault. Inside the boardroom, the air was tomb-silent, thick with the smell of old money, lemon-polished mahogany, and the cloying, inappropriate scent of Sienna Hayes's tuberose perfume. Richard "Rick" Sterling stared at the head of the table, his impatience a vibrating frequency in the room. He despised this. The performative grief, the legal jargon, the waiting. His father, Arthur Sterling, was dead. It was a transaction. Arthur was gone. Rick was next. It was the natural order. He adjusted the cuff of his Brioni suit, a $15,000 armor of charcoal wool. Beside him, Sienna shifted, her leather skirt creaking against the plush chair. Bringing her was a power move. A signal to the old guard, to his father's ghost, that Rick's era had begun. Sienna was his era, all glittering surfaces, curated ambition, and unapologetic self-interest. She was 26, an influencer with eyes the color of a shallow sea, and she looked spectacularly out of place. At the head of the table sat Ms. Evelyn Reed. She was a woman carved from granite, dressed in a severe navy suit that had likely been fashionable in 1995. She had been Arthur's personal attorney, his fixer, for 30 years. Her gray hair was pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to pull her eyes into a permanent, analytical squint. She looked at Sienna with the quiet, profound disdain a librarian reserves for someone eating barbecue ribs in the rare manuscripts section. "Mr. Sterling," Evelyn began, her voice a dry rustle of parchment. "We are gathered to execute the last will and testament of your father, Arthur Sterling. Ms. Hayes," she added, her gaze flicking to Sienna, "your presence is irregular, but Richard has insisted. Let the record show you are here as a guest of Mr. Sterling and not as a named beneficiary." Sienna flushed. "I'm here for emotional support," she snapped, her voice too high. Rick put a placating hand on her thigh. "It's fine, Evelyn. Just get on with it. I have a board meeting at 4. Evelyn Reed stared at him. It was a long, cold, assessing look. It was the look Arthur used to give him, the one that said, "You are, as ever, a profound disappointment." "As you wish," she said. She donned a pair of half-moon glasses and picked up the thick vellum document. "I, Arthur Sterling, being of sound mind and body." Rick tuned it out. He mentally scanned his portfolio. He'd shorted the yen, he needed to close the Singapore deal, and Sienna wanted to go to Gstaad for New Year's. He wondered if he could liquidate the Hamptons property before the capital gains tax kicked in. Sienna, meanwhile, was doing her own math. She was calculating the square footage of the penthouse she'd soon occupy, the clarity of the diamonds she would demand. She squeezed Rick's hand. "We're almost there, baby. And therefore, the bulk of my estate," Evelyn's voice cut through the fog, "comprising Sterling Holdings, the New York penthouse, the London flat, the Aspen estate, and all liquid assets held in trust, valued at an estimated $1.2 billion. Rick sat up. This was it. Sienna held her breath, her painted red nails digging into his palm. Evelyn Reed paused. She looked up, over the top of her glasses, directly at Rick. There was something almost imperceptible in her expression, a glint of satisfaction. It chilled him. "All said assets," Evelyn continued, her voice clear and sharp as a scalpel, are to be placed into the Sterling Legacy Trust. This trust is to be managed and its assets dispersed in equal measure to my beloved son, Richard Sterling, and his lawfully wedded wife, Mrs. Lena Sterling. The name hung in the air, an alien sound. Rick's blood turned to ice. Sienna's head snapped toward him, her blonde hair whipping across her face. What? Rick's mouth was dry. Evelyn. That's a mistake. A typo. My father was senile, he added, his voice rising in panic. Clearly he was not, Evelyn said, her voice flat. I spoke with him the day before his passing. His mind was, as ever, sharper than your own. Who is Lena Sterling? Sienna demanded, her voice a shrill crack. Rick, who is that? It's no one, Rick stammered, pulling his hand away from hers. It's a legal fiction, a mistake from years ago. It is not a mistake, Mr. Sterling, Evelyn said. She reached into a separate folder and slid a document across the polished table. It spun and came to a perfect stop directly in front of him. It was a photocopy, a certificate of marriage from King County, Washington. The marriage between Richard Sterling and Lena Petrova, Evelyn read, was registered 3 years, 2 months, and 12 days ago. Your father, as part of his meticulous estate planning, procured this certified copy. As you never filed for dissolution or divorce, this marriage is, by the laws of the state of New York, valid and binding. Sienna stared at the paper. Her perfectly constructed face began to crumble. The mascara, the lip liner, the foundation. It was all just paint on a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Wife, she whispered, her voice trembling. Wife? 3 years? She stood up, knocking her chair over. You told me we were getting married. You told me I was the one. You have a wife? Sienna, sit down. Keep your voice down, Rick hissed, his face pale. This was not a complication. This was a catastrophe. Don't you tell me to sit down, she shrieked. You lied to me! You've been lying to me this whole time! Evelyn Reed simply watched, her hands folded. Who is she? Sienna screamed, her eyes wild. Is she why you wouldn't let me move into the penthouse? Is she— Oh my God, everyone knows about me. The tabloids, the blogs, and you have a wife? You made me look like a fool. You made me look like a cheap— That's enough, Sienna, Rick commanded, standing. Enough? I'll tell you what's enough, you bastard! She grabbed the heavy crystal water carafe from the table. Miss Hayes, I would not do that, Evelyn said calmly. Sienna ignored her. With a guttural scream, she hurled the carafe. It missed Rick and shattered against the wall, spraying water and shards of crystal over a priceless Jackson Pollock painting. You're a liar, she sobbed, half in rage, half in the agony of her ambition turning to ash. A pathetic, married liar! She grabbed her purse, a white Birkin bag that Lena Sterling probably couldn't even identify. You will be hearing from my lawyer, from everyone's lawyer! She stormed out of the boardroom, slamming the door so hard the adjoining wall shuddered. Rick stood there, breathing heavily, his suit spattered with water. He was ruined. He slowly turned to Evelyn Reed, who was already blotting at the Pollock with a handkerchief. Fix this, Evelyn, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Evelyn looked at him, and for the first time, she allowed herself a small, cold smile. Fix it? Mr. Sterling, I just did. Your father was very clear. The trust is ironclad. Not a single dollar, not one stock certificate, not even the keys to the Aspen House can be released until both you and Mrs. Lena Sterling sign the disbursement forms. Together. She paused, walking back to the table. Your father's final instruction to me was, he made his bed, now he must lie in it. With his wife. Rick felt the floor drop out from beneath him. He was trapped by a dead man and a woman he hadn't seen in nearly 3 years. Where is she? He whispered. Evelyn Reed picked up another piece of paper. It held a simple, handwritten address. Your father was, as I said, meticulous. She lives on Bainbridge Island, Washington. She appears to be a librarian. Evelyn slid the paper toward him. I suggest you buy a plane ticket, Mr. Sterling, and I would strongly advise against flying private. As of this moment, your accounts are frozen. The echo of the slammed door vibrated in Rick's bones. The boardroom, which moments ago had felt like the stage for his coronation, now felt like a cage. The smell of tuberose had been replaced by the acrid stench of his own panic. "Frozen?" he repeated, the word catching in his throat. "What do you mean, frozen?" Evelyn Reed returned to her seat, a picture of infuriating calm. The terms of the will are explicit. Upon the reading, all personal and corporate accounts held solely by Richard Sterling are temporarily seized by the estate until the trust can be legally activated. The activation, as I've mentioned, requires the signatures of both named trustees. "That's insane! I run a global company!" Rick's voice cracked, a sound he hadn't made since puberty. "I have payroll. I have deals closing. You can't just stop everything." "Your father could," Evelyn replied, tapping the will. "And he did. He foresaw this reluctance on your part. He implemented this clause to ensure your immediate and undivided attention." Rick paced, pulling at his tie, the Brioni suit suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. He was the CEO, the Titan. Men twice his age quieted when he entered a room. And this old, dried-up woman and his dead father were treating him like a child whose allowance had been revoked. And Sienna. God, Sienna! His phone was already buzzing on the table, a furious, relentless vibration. He glanced at the screen. 14 missed calls from Sienna Hayes, 3 from Mitchell Vance, her shark of a lawyer, and 2 from Page 6. The conflagration had begun. The bomb hadn't just gone off in the room, it had vaporized his entire life. "She'll talk," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "She'll go to every tabloid, every blogger. She'll burn me to the ground." "Yes," Evelyn agreed, with no sympathy whatsoever. "She strikes me as the type." She steepled her fingers. "Which is why, I presume, you had her sign a non-disclosure agreement." Rick froze. The NDA, of course. He'd made every woman he'd dated exclusively sign one. It was standard operating procedure, a shield of legal-grade titanium. Page 4, Clause 8b, Public Scandal and Defamation. It includes a clawback provision on all gifts and compensation. "How comprehensive," Evelyn said, her tone dry. "Then I suggest you have your legal team. Oh, wait." She gave him that same thin smile. "They are part of the Sterling Holdings payroll, which is currently frozen. You may have to call them yourself, from your personal cell phone, which I imagine is on a plan paid for by—" Oh dear, Rick felt a surge of pure, unadulterated hatred. This wasn't just a will, it was a masterpiece of posthumous revenge. Arthur hadn't just tied his hands, he'd cut them off. "This wife, Lena," Rick said, forcing the name out. She knows about this." "Mrs. Sterling has not been contacted by this office," Evelyn said. "Your father was very specific that you, and you alone, should be the one to re-establish contact." Re-establish contact? Like she was a dormant client. Not a woman he had married in a fever dream of love and guilt, and then systematically erased from his life. "He knew," Rick said, the realization dawning. "My father. He knew about Lena all along." "Your father knew everything, Richard," Evelyn said softly, her tone shifting for the first time, losing its hard edge. "He knew you filed the marriage certificate in a rural county, thinking it would never be found. He knew you were sending her hush money, her words, not mine, which she was dutifully donating, every penny, to the Bainbridge Island Historical Society." Rick staggered back, feeling as though he'd been physically struck. Donating it? He'd been sending her $20,000 a month. "He knew about Miss Hayes, of course," Evelyn continued, her voice regaining its chill. "He was appalled, not by the infidelity. He was a practical man. He was appalled by the vulgarity, the public spectacle. He said you were building an empire with one hand and setting it on fire with the other, just for the thrill of watching something burn. The words hit their mark. It was exactly what Arthur had said to him after the disastrous Forbes interview, where Rick had posed with 2 models on the wing of his jet. "So this is it?" Rick said, his voice hollow. "A test? A cosmic joke from beyond the grave? He freezes my life, sicks my mistress on me, and forces me to go crawling to a librarian?" "She is, by all accounts, a very good librarian," Evelyn noted. "Head archivist, in fact. Your father was impressed. He admired her." That, somehow, was the worst blow of all. Arthur Sterling had admired no one. This trust," Rick said, grasping at straws. "What are the terms? Once we sign, we just split the money? I can buy her out. I'll give her $100 million, $200 million. She can have the London flat. Just name a price." Evelyn sighed, as if explaining a complex theory to a simple-minded child. "Richard, this is not a negotiation. It's a life sentence. The Sterling Legacy Trust is not a bank account. It's a foundation, a charitable foundation." Rick just stared at her. "Your father liquidated almost 70% of his personal holdings in his final months. That $1.2 billion is not for you to spend on Gstad. It is the endowment for the foundation. You and Lena are not the beneficiaries. You are the co-chairs. The trust provides you with a reasonable living stipend, your father's term, of $200,000 a year. Each. The rest is to be given away. $200,000. Rick spent that on watches. And the company?" he whispered, terrified of the answer. "Sterling Holdings? The company is the trust's primary asset. Its profits fund the trust. You are still CEO, yes, but you no longer answer to a board of shareholders. You answer to your co-chair, Mrs. Lena Sterling. All major financial decisions, acquisitions, liquidations, even your own salary, require unanimous approval from both of you." Rick finally, truly understood. He wasn't ruined. He was in hell. His father had not disinherited him. He had shackled him, chained him, legally and financially, to the one woman, the one memory he had spent 3 years trying to bury. He walked to the window. The rain had stopped, but the city looked gray, alien. His reflection stared back at him, a pale, terrified man in a very expensive suit. "I need a flight to Seattle," he said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual booming confidence. "I'll have my assistant book you one," Evelyn said. "I trust coach is acceptable?" Rick didn't answer. He was already imagining the small cottage, the scent of old books and sea air. He was thinking about Lena Petrova. And for the first time in his life, Richard Sterling had no idea what to do next. The flight to Seattle was a 7-hour humiliation. Rick Sterling, a man who hadn't flown commercial in a decade, was wedged into a middle seat in row 34 of an Alaska Airlines flight. His knees were jammed against the seat in front of him, and the man on his right, a software developer named Kevin, was enthusiastically detailing his new app for logging craft beer. Rick's phone was dead. He'd left his charger in the Bentley, which was parked at the private airfield in Teterboro. He had $400 in cash from his wallet and 1 credit card, a lowly American Express Platinum, not his Black Centurion, which had been declined when he tried to buy a bottle of water at Hudson News. Account frozen. He had landed at SeaTac, taken a cab to the ferry terminal, and now stood on the stern of the MV Tacoma as it cut through the cold, choppy waters of Puget Sound. The Seattle skyline, a monument to the very tech-driven ambition he championed, receded behind him. Ahead lay Bainbridge Island, a green, brooding shadow against the twilight sky. The wind was brutal. It whipped his unstyled hair across his face and cut through his thin Italian suit. He was freezing, exhausted, and profoundly, primordially angry. But beneath the anger, something else churned, a cold, dark stone of memory. Lena Petrova. He hadn't allowed himself to think her name in years. It was a file he had locked, encrypted, and buried. He'd met her 4 years ago. He was in Seattle to acquire a portfolio of historical buildings in Pioneer Square. He intended to gut them, leave the brick facades, and build luxury lofts. Lena was the head archivist at the City Historical Society, and she was the primary obstacle. She'd stood up at the city council meeting, a woman who looked utterly unremarkable. Brown hair in a simple bun, no makeup, a faded cardigan. And she had systematically, with surgical precision, dismantled his entire proposal. She used his own projections against him, cited zoning laws he hadn't known existed, and spoke with fiery, unshakable passion about the cultural vandalism of erasing a city's memory for another glass and steel box for people who don't even live here. He'd lost. The council had voted against him. He had been furious. He'd cornered her afterward, intending to intimidate her, to buy her, to find her price. "Everyone has a price, Miss Petrova. What's yours?" She had just looked at him, her eyes, a deep, clear gray, like the water in front of him now, filled not with fear, but with pity. "You must be so empty, Mr. Sterling." To think that. No one had ever spoken to him like that. He was intrigued. He'd pursued her. Not with flowers and cars, which she'd mocked, but with debate. He'd found her at the archive. He'd argued with her about history, art, philosophy. He'd found, to his astonishment, that she was smarter than him. She wasn't impressed by his money or his power. She was the only person he'd ever met who saw the architecture of his mind and wasn't afraid to point out the flaws. He'd fallen for her. It was a violent, obsessive, terrifying fall. It felt like authenticity. It felt real. His father, Arthur, was in the midst of pressuring him to merge with a European conglomerate. The deal required an image, a partner, a sterling woman. He'd shown Arthur a picture of Sienna Hayes, whom he'd met at a fundraiser. Arthur had approved. "She looks expensive," he'd grunted. "Good. Projecting wealth is half of wealth." In a fit of rebellion, a desperate act of claiming one thing for himself, Rick had flown back to Seattle. He'd found Lena at a small tavern with her friends. He'd pulled her outside into the rain. "Marry me," he'd said. "Don't be ridiculous, Rick. You're drunk." "I'm not. Marry me. Right now. I don't want to be that person. The one my father is turning me into. You make me real." She had seen the desperation, the truth in his eyes. And God help her. She loved him. She loved the broken, brilliant, angry man she saw hiding inside the corporate raider. They'd driven to the King County Courthouse, found a 24-hour clerk, and done it. His hands were shaking so hard he'd dropped the ring. They had 3 days. 3 perfect, rain-soaked days in a rented cottage, disconnected from the world. Then, his phone had buzzed. New York, the deal, his father. "I have to go," he'd told her. "It's the merger. It's complicated." "Take me with you," she'd pleaded. "I can't. Not yet. My father. He's old-fashioned. He wouldn't understand. You're too good for them. Let me handle him. Let me fix this. It's temporary." It was the last time he'd seen her. He'd sent the money. A monthly deposit. A quiet, digital reminder of their temporary arrangement. At first, he'd told himself it was to protect her, to keep her safe from his world. Then, it was to protect himself from her. She was the living, breathing evidence of his one catastrophic moment of weakness. His one act of authenticity. And Sienna had been so easy. She was a transaction. She wanted fame. He wanted a beautiful, unthreatening accessory. It worked. Until it didn't. The ferry shuddered, docking. He was here. He rented a drab Ford Focus, the last car available, and drove, using his dead phone's last ounce of battery for the GPS. The address Evelyn had given him wasn't a condo. It was a small pre-war cottage, set back from the road, almost hidden by an unruly, magnificent garden of wildflowers and towering Douglas firs. He parked. The air was silent, save for the wind in the trees and the distant foghorn of the ferry. He smelled wood smoke. He walked up the stone path. The cottage was painted a soft gray, with white trim. It was small, perfect, and utterly, terrifyingly her. It was a fortress of quiet. He saw her before she saw him. She was in the side garden, on her knees in the dirt. She was wearing overalls, boots caked in mud, and a thick wool sweater. Her hair, longer than he remembered, was in a messy braid. She was strong, her shoulders defined as she worked a trowel into the rocky soil. She was planting something. She looked happy. She looked whole. This was not the pale, heartbroken girl he had abandoned. This was a woman he didn't know at all. He must have made a sound, a snap of a twig. She froze. Slowly, Lena Petrova stood up, wiping her hands on her overalls. She turned. Her gray eyes met his. There was no shock, no gasp, no tears. She just looked at him, the man who had married her and vanished, the man who had broken her heart, the man who was now standing in her garden looking like a ghost in a $1,000 suit. "So," she said, her voice as calm and cold as the sound. "The dragon's finally dead." Rick was speechless. He'd rehearsed a dozen scenarios. Tears, screaming, a door slammed in his face. He'd even, in a fit of absurd optimism, pictured a tearful reunion. He had not prepared for this. This calm, surgical precision. My father, yes, he passed 2 days ago," Rick managed, his voice sounding hollow. Lena nodded, her gaze sweeping over him. He felt stripped bare. She wasn't just looking at him, she was reading him. She saw the expensive, rumpled suit, the exhaustion, the panic humming beneath his skin. "And you're here," she stated. It wasn't a question. "He must have left quite a mess. You don't seem surprised to see me." A small, bitter laugh escaped her. "Rick, I've been expecting you for 3 years. I just assumed you'd send a lawyer, not come yourself. Things must be worse than I thought." She picked up her trowel and stabbed it into the damp earth. "You'd better come inside. You're trespassing, and you're scaring the birds." She turned and walked toward the cottage, not bothering to see if he was following. He was, of course. He was a dog on a leash he hadn't known was there. He stepped inside. His penthouse in New York was a monument to minimalist, brutalist design. All glass, chrome, and hard edges in shades of black and white. It was a sterile, lifeless magazine cover. Lena's home was the opposite. It was overflowing with life. The walls were a warm, buttery yellow, lined floor to ceiling with bookshelves. Not curated, leather-bound sets, but a chaotic, beloved library of paperbacks, hardcovers, and old manuscripts. A fire blazed in a cast-iron stove. A half-finished weaving project, a riot of blues and golds, was stretched on a large loom by the window. The air smelled of wood smoke, old paper, and soup. A large, scruffy dog that looked part wolfhound lifted its head from a rug, gave Rick a low, unimpressed growl, and went back to sleep. "He's right. You do smell like fear," Lena said, walking into the small kitchen. "Tea? What? No, I need a scotch. I have chamomile or I have tap water. I'm not running a bar for your crises, Rick." She filled a kettle and set it on the stove. "Sit." He sat at a small, scarred wooden table. He felt huge, ungainly, a bull in her china shop. She sat opposite him, lacing her muddy fingers together. Her hands were strong, calloused, her nails short and clean. He remembered those hands. He remembered them tracing the lines of his face. The memory sent a jolt, sharp and unwanted, through him. "You knew," he said. "You said you knew he was dead. I read the Wall Street Journal. Arthur Sterling's death is global news. And you knew about the will. I knew Arthur. He wasn't the kind of man to go quietly. He was a chess player. He's been planning this move for a long time. Rick's head swam. You knew Arthur? You spoke to him? Oh, yes, Lena said, her voice casual. He found me. About 6 months after you left. He showed up right where you're sitting. He wanted to see the liability, the impulsive mistake his billion-dollar son had made. Rick felt sick. His father had been here, in this house. He came here to buy my silence just like you did, Lena continued, her voice hardening. He offered me $10 million to sign dissolution papers and disappear. And you? I told him to get the hell off my property. A ghost of a smile played on her lips. I think it was the first time anyone had said no to him in about 40 years. He was intrigued. He came back. He came back? Twice a month for 2 years. We'd have tea. He'd asked me about my work at the archive. He was fascinated by the history of the logging industry. He'd talk about his own life, about you. The kettle began to scream. Lena got up, her movements unhurried, and prepared 2 mugs of tea. She set one in front of him. Chamomile. He was, she said softly, the most miserable man I have ever met. He was a dragon sitting on a pile of gold, terrified someone would steal it, and heartbroken that no one wanted him. Rick stared into the tea. He was seeing a picture of his father he couldn't recognize. The man he knew was a tyrant, a voice on the phone demanding more. More profit, more growth, more. He respected you, Lena said, sitting back down. I think he loved you, in his own broken, terrible way. But he was terrified that he had raised a man who was just a shallow copy of himself. All ambition, no roots. All drive, no soul. And he told you this, Rick said, his voice laced with acid. He did, and I told him he was right to be, because that's what you had become. The words hit him, but they didn't have the sting he expected. They just felt true. So he set this trap, Rick said, finally getting to the point. This foundation, this joke. It's not a joke, Rick. It's his life's work. It's his apology. He's giving it all away, and he's trusting us to do it. He's trusting you, Rick corrected. I'm just the prisoner. I'm the collateral. He's shackled me to you to make sure I don't screw it up. Yes, she agreed, without blinking. That's exactly what he did. He looked at her. Really looked at her. The quiet librarian. The brown-haired girl he'd hidden. She was a fortress. She had been playing a long game with his father while he was playing dress-up with Sienna in Vanity Fair. So what now, Lena? He asked, his voice weary. My life is frozen. My company is paralyzed. That woman I was with, Sienna, is about to go public with every sordid detail of my life. I am, for all intents and purposes, ruined. And the only way out is you. He leaned forward, trying one last desperate gambit. The old Rick. I need you to sign. Name your price. I will find a way. We can dissolve the foundation. We can petition the court. We can take the money and split it, 50-50. You'd be one of the richest women in the world. You'd never have to plant your own, whatever those are. Again, Lena looked at him. The pity he'd seen 4 years ago was back. It was devastating. You're still doing it, she whispered. Even now, you're still trying to buy your way out of your own life. She stood up. I'm not signing anything, Rick, not like this. Lena, you don't understand what's at stake. I understand perfectly. You're here because your allowance was cut off. You're not here for me. You're not here because you regret what you did. You're not here because you're sorry. You're here because your father finally found a leash long enough to reach you. She walked to the door and opened it. The cold, damp air rushed in. I am not your escape hatch, Rick. I'm not your partner and I'm not your wife. Not anymore. Not in any way that matters. Lena, please, he said, standing. It was a word he never used. I'll sign, she said. He stopped. You will? I will, on one condition. Anything. You tell me the truth, not the half-truth, Not the version you tell your lawyers. The truth. About her. About us. And about why you were more terrified of your father than you were of losing me." She looked at him, her gray eyes as unyielding as the granite of her garden. "You have to excavate, Rick. You have to dig it all up, and I have to watch you do it. And then, maybe, we can talk about the money." Rick stood at the threshold, the cold Bainbridge air warring with the wood smoke warmth from the cottage. He was trapped. The old Rick, the one who dominated boardrooms, who charmed models, who bulldozed city councils, was useless here. That man had no currency. He looked at Lena, this woman of chamomile tea and quiet strength. She wasn't asking for money or power. She was asking for something he'd never given anyone, least of all himself. Unvarnished honesty. He let out a breath he felt he'd been holding for 3 years. It came out ragged, a white plume in the twilight. "Okay." He stepped back inside, and she closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking into place felt unnervingly final. He sat back down at the table. The wolfhound, Barge, as he'd learned from its collar, lifted its head, huffed, and went back to sleep. Even the dog was judging him. "Her name," Rick began, his voice low, "is Sienna Hayes. I met her at a charity gala in New York. She was easy. She was what my father expected. She was ambitious. She knew what she wanted. It was a transaction. She wanted the lifestyle, the name. I wanted an accessory. Someone who looked good in photographs and wouldn't ask me difficult questions." He looked at his hands, unable to meet Lena's eyes. "Someone who wasn't you." Lena just listened, her expression unreadable. "When I left you here," he continued, the words tasting like ash, "I told myself it was temporary, to protect you from my father. But it was a lie. I was protecting myself. You saw me, Lena. You saw the hollow part. The part that was just a terrified kid trying to impress a man who could not be impressed. I couldn't be that person and be the CEO of Sterling Holdings. I couldn't be weak. And loving you felt like weakness. It felt like a liability. So you chose the lie," Lena said, her voice quiet. "I chose the armor. Sienna was armor. The penthouse was armor. The jet was armor. I built a fortress of things so no one could see there was nothing inside." He finally looked up. Her eyes were bright. She wasn't crying, but she was close. Not for him, for the man he'd failed to be. "And my father," Rick said, the last piece falling into place. "I was terrified of him. I've been terrified of him my whole life. He was this God, this angry Old Testament God. Everything I did, every deal, every acquisition, was to finally get him to say, 'Well done, son.' Just once." He laughed, a dry, broken sound. "And in the end, the only person he said 'well done' to was you. The one person I threw away." Silence descended. The fire crackled. Barge snored. Lena took a deep, shuddering breath. "Thank you," she whispered. "For that. That was the truth." "So now you know," Rick said, feeling emptied. "I'm a coward. I'm a fraud. And I'm broke. Can we sign the papers now?" "Not yet." Lena stood and walked to a heavy oak file cabinet in the corner, one that looked like it belonged in the archive. She pulled open a drawer and retrieved a thick, leather-bound folder. She placed it on the table between them. "What is that?" Rick asked. "It's Arthur's apology," she said. "He gave it to me about a month ago. He knew he was dying. He told me, 'When Rick comes, and he will come, this is the manual for your new life.'" Rick opened it. It wasn't legal documents. It was a plan. It was the Sterling Petrova Foundation. His father, the ruthless capitalist, had spent the last year of his life meticulously planning a massive charitable organization. There were files on library endowments, historical preservation grants, arts funding for inner-city schools, and affordable housing initiatives. It was beautiful. It was a legacy. He did all this?" Rick murmured, flipping through pages of detailed proposals and financial projections. "He did," Lena said. "And he did it with me. After our tea, he'd stay and we'd work. He'd ask me, 'Where does the money do the most good, Lena? Not the most public good, the most good.' He was trying to buy back his soul. He knew he'd spent his life building an empire of things, as you call it. He wanted his death to build an empire of value." Rick saw a handwritten note from Arthur, scrawled on a blueprint for a community center. "Lena, check the zoning. Rick will know the loophole for the air rights. He's smart, just lazy." Rick felt a sudden, sharp sting behind his eyes. "He didn't trap you, Rick," Lena said softly, seeing his face. "He saved you. He knew the money was killing you. The ambition was hollowing you out. He knew Sienna, or someone like her, would eventually destroy you. So he took away the poison." "And he chained me to the antidote," Rick said, looking at her. "He chained you to a partner," Lena corrected. "He told me, 'Rick has the killer instinct, and you have the conscience. He knows how to build. You know why.' He didn't want to disinherit you, Rick. He wanted to complete you." Rick Sterling, a man who had not cried since his dog died when he was 8, put his head in his hands and wept. He wept for his father, for the man he'd never known. He wept for Lena, for the love he'd betrayed. And he wept for himself, for the empty, wasted years. Lena didn't coddle him. She let him grieve. She just sat, a silent, steady presence. After a long time, he collected himself, wiping his face. He felt lighter. Emptied, yes, but not hollow. "Okay," he said, his voice thick. "Okay, what do we do?" "We?" Lena asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, we. It's the Sterling Petrova Foundation, isn't it? You can't do this without me. I know the loopholes. I know how to build." A genuine smile touched Lena's lips for the first time. It was like the sun breaking through the Puget Sound fog. "Yes, I suppose you do. Sienna," he said. "She's still a problem. She'll be on Good Morning America by tomorrow." "Yes, she will," Lena said. "So you'd better call her." "I can't. My phone is dead. My accounts—" Lena slid her own phone across the table. "I have a good data plan, and I assume you remember her lawyer's number." Rick looked at the phone, then at her. "What do I tell them? You're not going to talk to her lawyer. You're going to talk to her. You're not going to threaten her with the NDA. You're going to tell her the truth. You're going to apologize. And then, you're going to offer her a donation." "A donation?" "A one-time significant donation to the Sienna Hayes Foundation for Aspiring Influencers, or whatever she wants to call it. From our foundation. Call it a severance package. Make her a founder of something. Give her the one thing she actually wants." "A headline," Rick said, a slow smile dawning. "A legacy. Not as a mistress, but as a philanthropist." "Exactly. You turn the scandal into a press release. It's not a payoff. It's a partnership. Your father was right. You are smart." Rick picked up the phone. He felt a surge of energy he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the thrill of the kill. It was the thrill of the build. "One more thing," Lena said as he started to dial. "What?" "I'm coming back to New York with you." Rick's heart leaped. "You are?" "I am, but we're not staying in your glass box of a penthouse. Arthur left me the keys to his private study. It's been sealed. He said we were to open it, together. Besides," she said, a glint of steel in her eye, "if I'm going to be co-chair of a billion-dollar foundation, I'm going to need a better suit." Rick and Lena flew back to New York 2 days later. This time they flew first class, on an expense account Evelyn Reed had graciously expedited for the Sterling Petrova Foundation. The transformation was immediate. Rick, having confessed and been absolved, felt like a man emerging from a bunker. He was still Rick Sterling, but the manic, jagged energy was gone. He was focused. He spent the flight not barking at assistants, but quietly explaining to Lena the complex architecture of his father's holdings. Lena, for her part, was a revelation. She had shed her muddy overalls for a simple, elegant wool dress. She was absorbing the information with the speed of a high-end processor, asking questions that cut to the heart of the matter. So the shell corporation in the Caymans is a tax liability, not an asset? Why not dissolve it and move the capital into the education fund? Rick had never been more impressed, or more intimidated. They did not land at Teterboro. They landed at JFK, like normal people. A simple black sedan, not a Maybach, was waiting. "First stop," Lena said, as they crossed the bridge into Manhattan, "is Ms. Hayes. You handled her lawyer. Now we handle her." The meeting was at the plaza. Sienna had demanded it. She arrived flanked by her lawyer, Mitchell Vance, looking like a woman scorned and ready for war. She was draped in black, a grieving widow for a life she'd never had. Rick and Lena were already seated. "Sienna," Rick said, his voice calm. Sienna's eyes widened when she saw Lena. She had clearly expected a dowdy, mousy woman. Lena met her gaze, not with hostility, but with a quiet, unshakable confidence. "So, this is the wife," Sienna sneered, sitting. "The librarian. Come to claim your winnings?" "There are no winnings, Sienna," Lena said, her voice gentle. "Only a great deal of work. Richard and I are co-chairs of his father's new foundation. We're here to resolve things." "Resolve?" Mitchell Vance interjected. "My client has been subjected to public humiliation. She was in a committed, loving relationship only to be told—" "Mr. Vance," Rick cut in, "your client signed a non-disclosure agreement that includes a morality clause. By her energetic departure from the lawyer's office and her subsequent calls to page 6, she has voided it. We could quite easily sue to reclaim the $1.2 million in gifts I've given her this year alone." Vance's face tightened. Sienna went pale. "But we're not going to do that," Lena said, sliding a folder across the table. "That's a press release. We've scheduled a conference for tomorrow morning." Sienna opened it. Her eyes scanned the page. Sterling Foundation announces first major grant, the Sienna Hayes Initiative for Female Entrepreneurs. It's a $5 million seed grant, Lena explained, to establish a non-profit in your name helping young women build their own brands and businesses. You will be the founder, the chairwoman, and the public face. Your story, of ambition and drive, will be its inspiration. Sienna stared at the paper, speechless. "You're not a victim, Sienna," Lena said. "You're a businesswoman. We're offering you a chance to be one, a real one, not an accessory." "$5 million, Sienna whispered. "And a clean break," Rick said. "You'll be a philanthropist, a founder. That's a much better story than jilted mistress, isn't it?" Sienna looked at Lena, then at Rick. The rage in her eyes was replaced by a cold, sharp calculation. She'd been outplayed, and she'd been given a better prize. $10 million, Sienna said. $7, Rick countered, without blinking. "And a seat on our advisory board for 1 year." Sienna smiled, a real, sharp businesswoman's smile. "Done." She stood, shook Lena's hand, and left with her lawyer. The Viper's nest was cleared. "You're ruthless," Lena murmured as they left the hotel. "You're a fast learner," Rick replied. "You wanted 10. Their next stop was Sterling Tower. The building loomed, a monument to his father's ego. Evelyn Reed was waiting for them in the lobby. She looked at Lena, and her granite-like face softened into a genuine smile. "Mrs. Sterling, it is an honor to finally meet you. Your father-in-law spoke of you with profound respect." "The honor is all mine, Ms. Reed. You were his most trusted ally," Lena said, shaking her hand. "Please, call me Evelyn." Evelyn looked at Rick. "Richard, you look better." "I feel worse," Rick joked. "That's the conscience setting in," Evelyn replied. "You'll get used to it." She led them not to the executive offices, but to a heavy oak door in a quiet hallway. It had no nameplate. just a high-security lock. "Your father's private study," Evelyn said. "It's been sealed since his passing. His instructions were that you two were to open it together. The code is... well, he was a sentimentalist in his own way." Rick looked at the keypad. I don't know." Lena stepped forward. "I do." She punched in 8 digits. A date. 05/14/1945. "His mother's birthday," Lena whispered. The lock clicked open. The heavy oak door swung open, and the air that met them was still, cool, and smelled of leather, pipe tobacco, and old paper. This was not the office Arthur Sterling used for business. This was his sanctuary. It was nothing like Rick's glass and chrome penthouse. It was a room from another century. Dark wood paneling, walls lined with books. Not just business journals, but poetry. Keats, Shelley, Whitman. A threadbare Persian rug covered the floor. On one wall was a massive, detailed map of the 19th century American West. "My God," Rick whispered. He had never known this room existed. Lena walked to the center, her fingers grazing a heavy mahogany desk. It was perfectly, obsessively neat. The only things on its surface were a vintage globe, a green banker's lamp, and a single, thick, cream-colored envelope. It was addressed in Arthur's sharp, aggressive handwriting to Richard and Lena. Rick's hand was shaking as he picked it up. He broke the wax seal, the Sterling family crest, and pulled out a single, heavy sheet of stationery. "Read it," Lena said softly, standing beside him. Rick cleared his throat and began. "My dearest Lena, and my son, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the first part of my plan has worked. You are together. Do not mistake this for sentiment. It is, like all my ventures, a strategic merger. I have merged my son's ambition with my daughter-in-law's soul. I trust the resulting entity will be more profitable than either of its parts. Lena, I am leaving you the most difficult task, to save my son from me. I taught him to conquer. I taught him that value was a number on a spreadsheet. I forgot to teach him that legacy is a garden, not a skyscraper. You must teach him how to plant something that grows. I fear I have raised a man who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. Do not let him fail. Richard, I am leaving you the one person I ever met who could not be bought. I am leaving you a conscience. It will be heavy, and it will be inconvenient. Do not, as is your instinct, try to discard it. I did not know how to love you, boy. I knew only how to build. I built an empire to protect you, and in doing so, I built a wall between us. I see now that I was a coward. I drove away your mother with my coldness, and I almost drove you away with my ambition. This foundation, it is my apology. It is the only way I know how to say, I'm sorry. The money is a curse. It is a weight. It has been my life's burden. I am now giving it to you, not as a prize, but as a responsibility. Do not waste it. Do not let it poison you as it poisoned me. Do not become the dragon. My only regret is that I will not be there to see what you build together, or who you become. Do well." Außer performance, Rick finished reading. He stood in the silence of his father's study, the letter trembling in his hand. He hadn't broken down on the plane, or in the lawyer's office, or even in Lena's cottage. But now, in this room, surrounded by the ghost of the man he never knew, he finally, truly broke. It was not a loud, dramatic grief. It was a quiet, profound shattering. The angry God of his childhood was gone, replaced by a lonely, regretful old man who had tried, in the only way he knew, to save his son. He felt Lena's hand on his back. A simple, solid, grounding touch. He turned, and without thinking, he pulled her into an embrace, burying his face in her hair, which smelled like the clean, cold air of the island. He wasn't holding an antidote. He wasn't holding a co-chair. He was holding Lena. "He loved you," she whispered, her arms circling him. "He was so proud of your mind, Rick. He just He just didn't know how to say it. He knew you, Rick murmured into her shoulder. He knew you were the only one who could fix this, who could fix me. We'll fix it together, she said, pulling back, her gray eyes clear and steady. We'll build his garden. They stood in that room for a long time, the past and future settling around them. They explored the study. They found Arthur's private journals, filled not with stock tips, but with observations on birds, with scraps of poetry, with heartbroken entries about Rick's mother. They found a framed, hidden photo behind a row of books. Rick, at age 10, proudly holding up a small, badly made wooden birdhouse. It was an excavation of a life. And in digging through Arthur's past, Rick and Lena were, without realizing it, laying the foundation for their own future. So, Rick said hours later, as the sun set over Manhattan, casting long shadows through the study. Co-chair, where do we begin? Lena looked at the detailed plans for the community center Arthur had been designing. We begin here, she said, tapping the blueprint. He was right. You know the loophole for the air rights. I want to break ground in a month. Rick looked at the plan. He looked at her. The old, familiar thrill of the build, the hunt, surged through him. But it was different now. It was clean. It was sharp. A month, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. I can get the permits in 2 weeks. 6 months later, the Sterling Petrova Foundation was not a headline. It was a force. The launch event was not a glittering gala at the Met. It was held on a windy Tuesday morning in the South Bronx, on a formerly derelict lot that was now a bustling construction site. The press was there, but so were community leaders, construction workers in hard hats, and a group of local high school students. A large banner hung behind the podium. The Arthur Sterling Community Center. Groundbreaking ceremony. Lena stood at the podium, and she was in her element. She wore no designer labels, just a simple, well-cut suit. She spoke with a passion that silenced the traffic and the jackhammers. She wasn't a librarian. She was a leader. Arthur Sterling spent his life building skyscrapers that touched the clouds, she said, her voice ringing out, full of conviction. But his final wish, his real legacy, was to build something that touched the ground, something that would grow roots. This center is not a gift, it is a partnership. It's a place for books, for art, for second chances. She turned and smiled at Rick, who stood just off to the side, watching her. My partner and I are honored to be the stewards of that wish. All eyes turned to Richard Sterling. The tabloids had been brutal at first. Billionaire's secret wife. Mistress paid millions. But the Sienna Hayes press conference, where she'd brilliantly, and with Rick's coaching, positioned herself as a new-age feminist philanthropist, had turned the tide. And the subsequent, relentless, quiet work of the foundation had done the rest. Rick stepped up to the podium. He was a different man. The restless, arrogant energy was gone. He was calm. He was centered. He looked happy. My father taught me how to read a balance sheet, Rick said, his voice steady. My wife taught me how to read a room, and my father's last lesson was that the most valuable things in life are the ones that can't be counted. He didn't speak for long. He spoke of new endowments for the city's archives, of the foundation's commitment to funding historical preservation, of value over profit. After, a reporter from the Times, not page 6, cornered him. Mr. Sterling, she said, you've effectively given up $1 billion personal inheritance. You're living on a $200,000 salary. You're working harder than you ever have. Any regrets? Rick looked over her shoulder. Lena was in the crowd, laughing with a group of the students, her face bright with purpose. She caught his eye and gave him that small, knowing smile. The one that saw all of him and wasn't afraid. He turned back to the reporter. Regrets? He said, a genuine smile touching his lips. I spent 38 years of my life being the richest, poorest man in New York. I had everything, and I had nothing. He looked at Lena again, a silent promise passing between them. Their relationship wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was something stronger. It was being rebuilt, brick by brick, on a foundation of honesty, shared purpose, and profound respect. It was the slow, steady growth of a garden. "I didn't give up anything," Rick Sterling said, turning back to the reporter. "I just stopped being poor." That's our story. The tale of the Sterling will is a journey from ambition to authenticity. It shows that sometimes you have to lose an empire to find your purpose, and that the strongest connections are the ones built on truth, not transactions. What did you think of Rick's transformation? And what about Lena's quiet strength? Let me know your favorite part in the comments below. If you loved this story of drama, resilience, and unexpected romance, please hit that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a good twist, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life fiction novels every week. Thanks for watching. A millionaire demanded his wife become a different person for one night. But what she did instead at his luxury gala changed his life forever. Before we start the story, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. The ballroom was a galaxy of shimmering lights suspended from a ceiling painted to look like a midnight sky. Crystal glasses chimed like tiny bells, a delicate counterpoint to the low hum of expensive conversations. This was Richard Sterling's universe, the annual Sterling Enterprises Gala, a pinnacle event where the city's elite orbited him, their brilliant, smiling faces tilted in deference. He stood at the center, a sun king in a bespoke tuxedo, his laugh effortless and his handshake firm. He was a master of this domain, a man who built skyscrapers that scraped the heavens, and tonight he was closing a deal that would secure his legacy. Across the sprawling marble floor, near a pillar half hidden by a monstrous floral arrangement, stood his wife, Elena. She was an anomaly in this glittering cosmos. Her dress was a simple, dark blue fabric that fell without the architectural precision of the couture gowns surrounding her. Her hair was tied back in a simple knot, and her face, devoid of the glamorous mask worn by the other women, looked pale under the fierce chandeliers. She held a glass of water, watching the bubbles rise as if they held the secrets of the universe. To Richard, she was not just an anomaly. She was a smudge on his otherwise perfect portrait of success. An inconvenient truth from a past he'd worked tirelessly to outgrow. He saw the glances thrown her way, quick, pitying, and dismissive. He felt each one like a physical blow to his reputation. The wife of Richard Sterling, looking like a librarian who had wandered in by mistake. A fresh wave of irritation washed over him. He had told her, explicitly, to make an effort. He had given her a black credit card with an obscene limit and the name of the city's most sought-after stylist. "Buy yourself a new personality if you have to," he'd snapped that morning, the words sharper than he'd intended, but not by much. Instead, she had chosen this shroud, this quiet rebellion. "Richard, my friend." A heavy hand landed on his shoulder. It was Marcus Vance, his business partner and closest confidant. Marcus was everything Richard valued: sharp, impeccably dressed, and oozing a charm that could disarm a hostile boardroom. His smile was as bright and polished as his Italian leather shoes. "You've outdone yourself. The Minister of Urban Development is practically eating out of your hand." Richard's focus shifted, the irritation momentarily forgotten. "Good. We need his approval before the ink is dry on the Harrison deal. Did you speak to him about the zoning permits?" "Consider it done," Marcus said, his eyes scanning the crowd with the predatory grace of a wolf. He's so mesmerized by the Sterling charitable wing, he'd approve a skyscraper in a public park if you asked. Richard chuckled. the sound deep and confident. The charitable wing was Marcus's brainchild, a brilliant PR move that painted their ruthless real estate acquisitions in a soft, philanthropic light. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the move that would elevate them from mere tycoons to city benefactors. As they spoke, a young, ambitious journalist with a microphone and a cameraman in tow approached them. "Mr. Sterling, a moment for a quick soundbite? Everyone is talking about the Celestial Tower project. How does it feel to be changing the city's skyline forever?" Richard's smile widened for the camera. This was his stage. "It's not just about changing the skyline," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "It's about building a future. It's about creating opportunities, about giving back to the city that has given me so much." From her lonely outpost by the pillar, Elena watched the performance. She saw the man she had once known, the dreamer with fire in his eyes and blueprints scattered across their tiny apartment floor, disappear completely into this polished, hollow stranger. The words he spoke were elegant, but they were a language she no longer understood. They had built his empire together, brick by brick, from the sale of her own father's small workshop. He had forgotten that part. It was a detail too humble for the grand narrative he was spinning. Her gaze drifted past him, to Marcus, who stood just behind Richard's shoulder, a perfect picture of loyal support. But Elena saw something else in Marcus's eyes as he watched Richard speak, a flicker of something cold, possessive, and deeply unsettling. It was an expression she had seen before, in fleeting moments when he thought no one was looking. It was the look of a man who saw Richard not as a friend, but as a tool. A server, a young woman with kind eyes and a nervous tick, paused beside her. "Ma'am, can I get you something else? A glass of champagne, perhaps?" Elena offered a small, genuine smile that seemed to light up her corner of the room. "No, thank you. The water is perfect." The server, accustomed to being ignored or dismissed, looked surprised by the warmth. She nodded and moved on. Richard, having finished his interview, finally allowed his gaze to sweep over to his wife. His eyes narrowed. He saw her smile at the server, a gesture so simple, so common. It was infuriating. Why couldn't she understand the rules of this world? He started towards her, a storm brewing in his expression, ready to drag her from the shadows and demand she play her part. But just as he took a step, a collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. The music softened, and all heads turned towards the grand entrance. A woman had arrived, draped in a crimson gown that seemed to drink the light of the room. Diamonds dripped from her neck and ears. She was a vision of wealth and power. Richard stopped, his annoyance momentarily forgotten, replaced by admiration for this perfect embodiment of his world. Everyone was captivated, everyone except Elena. She hadn't turned. Her gaze was fixed on her husband, and in her eyes for the first time that night was not sadness or loneliness, but a flicker of something else. A quiet, unyielding resolve. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her water, the simple act, a silent declaration. The night was still young, and the performance was far from over. She had her own part to play, a role he could never have anticipated. The silence in their penthouse was a living thing, a stark contrast to the echoing opulence of the gala they had just left. It was a cavernous space, with floor-to-ceiling windows that displayed the city's glittering tapestry like a captive jewel. Marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting, and modern art, chosen for its investment value rather than its beauty, adorned the walls. It was less a home than a monument to Richard's success. "I have never been so humiliated in my life." Richard's voice sliced through the quiet. He had shed his tuxedo jacket, and his tie was loosened, but the rigid anger in his posture remained. Elena stood by the window, her back to him, tracing the path of a distant airplane. "What did I do, Richard?" she asked, her voice soft, almost weary. "What did you do?" he scoffed, the sound echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "You stood there like a ghost at a feast, Elena. You wore that nothing of a dress. You spoke to the help. Do you have any idea how that looks? People were staring. They were pitying me." "They weren't pitying you, Richard. They weren't thinking about you at all," she said, turning to face him. Her expression was calm, a placid lake against his raging storm. "They were thinking about themselves, just like you were." The truth in her words only fueled his anger. "This is my life, my world, the one I built with my own 2 hands. You didn't build it alone," she whispered, the words barely audible but carrying the weight of years. He chose to ignore that. It was a history he had meticulously rewritten. The memory of their cramped apartment, the smell of burnt coffee from late nights poring over blueprints, was a ghost he refused to acknowledge. He remembered her then, with paint under her fingernails, and a belief in him that was fierce and absolute. She had sold her father's small, beloved woodworking shop to fund his first solo project, a risky venture that everyone else had called a fool's dream. That initial investment had been the seed from which his entire empire had grown. "That was a different time," he said dismissively. "We're in the big leagues now. Image is everything. Marcus understands that. Why can't you?" Marcus. It always came back to Marcus. Marcus, the silver-tongued charmer Richard had met 6 years ago. He had appeared at the perfect moment, when Richard's company was expanding faster than he could manage. Marcus had brought connections, ruthlessness, and an ambition that mirrored Richard's own. He had quickly become indispensable, not just a partner, but a friend who validated every one of Richard's new, extravagant tastes, and gently, persistently, pointed out Elena's shortcomings. "Marcus thinks you should have a stylist on retainer," Richard would say. Or, "Marcus was surprised you didn't come to the golf charity. All the wives were there." Each comment was a small, sharp chisel, chipping away at Elena's place in their life. Elena watched him now, seeing the shadow of Marcus's influence in the rigid set of his jaw, in the coldness of his eyes. "Marcus understands money, Richard. I'm not sure he understands much else. He understands what it takes to win," Richard shot back, pacing the length of the Persian rug. "And this Celestial Tower deal is the biggest win of my life. Everything has to be perfect, every detail. That includes my wife." On a small, elegant table on their expansive balcony, a single plant sat in a ceramic pot. It was a jasmine vine, a gift from Elena's mother years ago. It had once been lush and fragrant, its white blossoms filling their small apartment with a sweet perfume. Here, in the sterile, wind-whipped environment of the 50th floor penthouse, it was struggling. Its leaves were yellowed and brittle, its vines thin and searching. Elena watered it every day, tending to it with a quiet devotion, but it refused to thrive. The plant was a silent testament to their marriage, transplanted into an environment too cold and high to survive, slowly withering from neglect. She had Sophia, at least. Their housekeeper, a warm, sturdy woman in her late 60s with eyes that missed nothing, had been with Elena since before Richard's meteoric rise. Sophia moved through the silent apartment with a quiet efficiency, but her loyalty was fiercely, unreservedly Elena's. She saw the way Richard looked through his wife, the way Marcus's polite smiles never quite reached his eyes. Sophia would often leave a cup of herbal tea for Elena in her small art studio, the one room in the penthouse that felt alive, with a knowing, sympathetic glance. "He is a man who has forgotten the color of the sky," Sophia had once said in her soft, accented English, watching Richard bark orders into his phone. "He only sees the buildings that block it." Now, facing that man, Elena felt a profound sense of exhaustion. It was a weariness that went bone deep. She had tried for years to keep up. She had hosted the awkward dinners, smiled at the vapid conversations, and worn the uncomfortable clothes. But in doing so, she had felt herself fading, becoming as transparent and lifeless as the glass walls surrounding her. "I am your wife, Richard," she said, her voice finding a sliver of its old strength. "Not a corporate accessory, not a detail to be managed." "Then start acting like a wife," he thundered. "My wife, the wife of Richard Sterling." He turned and strode towards his office, a sleek, black and chrome chamber where he spent most of his waking hours. The conversation was over. For him, it was a problem stated, a directive given. For Elena, it was a door slamming shut on a part of her life she could no longer bear to inhabit. She walked out onto the balcony, the cool night air a welcome shock to her skin. She looked down at the withering jasmine vine. With a gentle finger, she touched one of its dry, curling leaves. She had been tending to this dying thing for so long, hoping for a sign of life, a single white blossom. But hope, she was beginning to realize, was not a passive act. It required more than just patience and water. It required fertile ground. It required sun. And in that moment, under the cold, distant stars, a new kind of resolve began to bloom within her. A quiet, radical idea. If she couldn't save the plant, perhaps she could still save herself. The announcement arrived via a sleek, embossed invitation delivered by a courier. The Celestial Charity Gala. It was the social event of the season, a night where fortunes were pledged and reputations were cemented. For Richard, it was more than a party. It was the grand stage for the unveiling of the Celestial Tower project. His investors, partners, and rivals would all be there. The city's media would broadcast it live. It was, in his words, the night that makes or breaks us. He slapped the invitation down on the granite island in their kitchen one morning, where Elena was quietly sipping her tea. "This is it," he announced, his voice buzzing with a nervous energy she hadn't heard in years. "The gala, in 1 month, and this time you will not embarrass me." He didn't look at her as he spoke, his attention already on the tablet displaying market trends. His words were a command, not a request. "I need you to look the part, Elena. I mean it. I've opened a new account for you." He slid a platinum credit card across the counter. It glinted under the morning light. "Hire a team, a stylist, a makeup artist, a trainer. I don't care what it costs. Buy a new wardrobe, buy a new face. Just be someone else for one night. Can you do that for me?" Elena looked at the card, then up at his averted face. The request was so fundamentally insulting, yet delivered with the casual indifference of a man ordering a coffee. Be someone else, for him, for his deal, for his world. A bitter taste filled her mouth. For years, she had tried to bend and contort herself into the shape he desired. And for what? To be told, in the end, that she simply wasn't enough. A strange calm settled over her. "All right, Richard," she said, her voice even. He finally looked at her, surprised by her easy compliance. He had expected a fight, tears, a futile argument. "All right?" "Yes," she said, picking up the card. It felt cold and foreign in her hand. "I'll take care of it." A relieved, self-satisfied smile spread across his face. "Good. That's good. I knew you'd see sense." He clapped his hands together, the business mogul who had just successfully negotiated another difficult merger. "Now I have to run. Marcus and I are meeting the architects." He leaned in, hesitated, and gave her a stiff, awkward peck on the cheek before striding out of the apartment, his mind already on concrete and steel. But Elena had no intention of visiting the glossy, sterile boutiques of the city's luxury district. The next day, dressed in simple jeans and a sweater, she took a taxi not to the gilded heart of the city, but to the forgotten fringes. She directed the driver to a neighborhood Richard wouldn't even fly over in his helicopter. A place of brick warehouses, faded murals, and the vibrant, chaotic pulse of real life. She found what she was looking for, the Northwood Community Arts Center. It was a modest, slightly dilapidated building, but through its large, grimy windows, she could see splashes of brilliant color. The sound of a struggling piano and children's laughter spilled out onto the street. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the heavy wooden door. The air inside smelled of turpentine, clay, and something else. Hope. The space was a riot of creativity. Canvases in various states of completion were propped against walls. Pottery wheels stood silent, spattered with dried clay. A group of children was gathered around a long table, messily painting a large banner. A young man with kind, intelligent eyes and streaks of blue paint in his dark, unruly hair looked up from the canvas he was working on. He was tall and lean, with an artist's long, expressive fingers. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice warm and a little wary. I hope so," Elena said, feeling a flutter of nervousness. This world felt more real and therefore more intimidating than any of Richard's boardrooms. "My name is Elena. I was wondering if you accept donations." The young man's face brightened. "Donations are our lifeblood. I'm Leo," he said, wiping a paint-stained hand on his jeans before offering it to her. His handshake was firm. "We're always short on supplies. Canvases, brushes, paint for the kids' program." Elena held up the platinum credit card. "I was thinking of something a little more substantial." Leo's eyebrows shot up. He looked from the card to her simple clothes, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "I don't understand. This center," Elena began, her voice gaining confidence as she looked around at the raw, beautiful art, at the focused faces of the children. "It's important. Places like this are important. I want to help. What do you need? New equipment? Repairs for the building? An expanded program?" Over the next few weeks, Elena became a quiet fixture at the center. She didn't just write checks. She listened. She learned the names of the children. She spoke to Leo about his own art. Powerful, evocative portraits of the people in his community. She saw how the center was a sanctuary, a place where people who were overlooked by the rest of the city could find a voice. She used Richard's money, but not on herself. She bought a new kiln for the pottery studio, state-of-the-art canvases for the painters, and mountains of supplies for the children's classes. She paid for the leaky roof to be repaired, and for a new coat of paint on the faded facade. She didn't hire a stylist. She hired a retired art teacher to run a new after-school program. With each purchase, with each small improvement to the center, she felt a part of herself, long dormant, reawakening. The money, which had once felt like a symbol of her gilded cage, was becoming a tool for creation, for connection. Leo watched her, his initial suspicion replaced by a deep, quiet admiration. He saw past the platinum card to the woman who sat with a shy, 7-year-old girl named Maya, patiently showing her how to mix colors. He saw the genuine joy in her eyes when an elderly man finished his first sculpture. "You're not like the other patrons we've had," he said to her one afternoon as they stood watching the kids paint. "They send a check, get their name on a plaque, and never come back." Elena smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I'm not a patron, Leo. I'm just remembering who I used to be." She was an artist. Before Richard, before the money, she had painted. Her hands, which had grown soft and idle, now found their way back to clay and charcoal. Leo encouraged her, setting up a small, quiet corner for her to work. And as she worked, the hollow ache in her chest began to fill with something new. Purpose. At home, Richard noticed a change, but he misinterpreted it. He saw a new light in her eyes and assumed the shopping and pampering were doing her good. "Feeling better, I see," he commented one evening, barely looking up from his phone. "Good. Keep it up. Just remember what it's all for." Oh, she remembered. She looked down at her hands, dusty with charcoal from the center, and knew with a certainty that shook her to the core that she wasn't doing this for him at all. She was doing it for herself. And the gala, which had once loomed as a night of humiliation, now looked like something else entirely. An opportunity. A stage for a very different kind of performance. Richard's world operated on a strict, predictable schedule. Markets opened and closed, meetings were set in stone, and his evenings were a carefully curated rotation of business dinners and networking events. Elena's sudden, unexplained absences were a disruption to this perfect order, a variable he couldn't control. "Where were you this afternoon?" he asked one evening, his tone laced with suspicion. "I called your cell. It went straight to voicemail." "I was out," Elena replied calmly, not looking up from the book she was reading. It was a book of poetry Leo had recommended. "Out where?" "The driver said he dropped you off downtown. Not at the salon, not at the boutiques. He said it was some rundown industrial area." "I was exploring," she said, turning a page. Her evasiveness was like a hook in his mind. The more she deflected, the more his imagination, goaded by years of corporate paranoia, ran wild. He couldn't fathom a world beyond his own, so her motives had to exist within its framework. Money or another man. Marcus, ever the loyal friend, was more than happy to water the seeds of doubt. They were in Richard's office, a glass box overlooking the city, nursing glasses of aged whiskey. "It's the money, Richard," Marcus said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "You give a woman like Elena. No offense, she's sweet, but she's not used to this world. A limitless credit card, and she's bound to get in over her head. Maybe she's embarrassed to tell you what she's been spending it on." He paused, letting the insinuation hang in the air. "Or maybe it's not for her." "What are you implying?" Richard asked, his jaw tight. "I'm not implying anything," Marcus said, raising his hands in a gesture of innocence. "I'm just saying, a woman feeling neglected? Sometimes they seek validation elsewhere. A pretty new dress is one thing. A handsome young distraction is another." The words were poison, and they went straight into Richard's bloodstream. He thought of the new light in Elena's eyes, her quiet smiles, her infuriating serenity. It wasn't the glow of a woman enjoying a shopping spree. It was the glow of a woman with a secret. The next day, he did something he would have once considered beneath him. He had his security team track her. The report was on his desk by evening. She had gone to the Northwood District, to an old brick building, the Northwood Community Arts Center. She had stayed for 5 hours. The report included a grainy photograph of her leaving the building, talking and laughing with a young, dark-haired man. Leo, rage, cold and pure, seized him. So this was it. His wife, spending his money on her lover's little art project. The humiliation was unbearable. The cheap, tawdry cliché of it all. He, Richard Sterling, was being made a fool of. He stormed home, the security photo burning a hole in his pocket. He found her in her studio, her hands covered in clay, a look of peaceful concentration on her face. The sight of her tranquility infuriated him. He threw the photograph down on her sculpting table. "Explain this." Elena flinched, startled. She looked at the photo, then back at his thunderous face. She saw the narrative he had already written in his mind. "That's Leo," she said, her voice quiet. "He runs the center." "The center?" Richard spat the word out. "Is that what you call it? How much of my money have you poured into this pathetic little hobby of his?" "It's not his hobby, Richard. It's a lifeline for a whole community. And I wasn't spending the money on him. I was spending it on them, on the children, on the artists." "Oh, spare me the saintly act," he roared, his voice bouncing off the studio walls. "I gave you money to fix yourself, to become presentable, and you took it and gave it to him. Do you have any idea how that makes me look?" "I have no idea how it makes you look," she replied, her voice gaining a steely edge. "But I know how it makes me feel. It makes me feel like myself again." "Yourself?" He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. You don't get to be yourself on my dime. You are Mrs. Richard Sterling, and you have been making a fool of me." The accusation of infidelity, so vile and baseless, hung in the air between them. Elena's heart ached, not with guilt, but with a profound sadness for the man he had become. A man who could only see the world through a lens of suspicion and possession. "I have never been unfaithful to you, Richard," she said, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed anger. "But you have been unfaithful to us for years. You've had an affair with your work, with your money, with your own reflection." His face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "That's it. You're done." He pulled out his phone and with a few sharp taps, made a call. "Cancel all cards under the name Elena Sterling. Effective immediately." He snapped the phone shut. "You are not to leave this apartment unless I say so. You will attend the gala, you will smile for the cameras, and you will act the part of the dutiful wife. After that, we are finished. I'll have my lawyers draw up the papers. You'll get a settlement generous enough to keep you quiet, and then you will be out of my life for good." He expected her to break, to cry, to beg. Instead, she stood straight and looked him directly in the eye, her own gaze clear and unwavering. The fear he had expected to see was absent, replaced by a quiet, resolute sorrow. "It's a pity," she said softly. "You've built the tallest buildings in the city, but you can't see the person standing right in front of you." She turned back to her sculpture, her hands returning to the clay as if he were no longer in the room. Her dismissal of him was more cutting than any scream. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him, leaving her in a silence that was no longer lonely, but filled with the grim purpose of a woman who had nothing left to lose. Meanwhile, in another part of the penthouse, Sophia was dusting Richard's office. She was a ghost in the house, overlooked and underestimated. As she polished the mahogany desk, she heard a muffled voice. Marcus was on the balcony, speaking on his phone, his voice low and urgent. "The transfer has to be seamless," Marcus was saying. "The final tranche moves the night of the gala, during the presentation. Everyone will be distracted." A pause. "No, Richard won't see it coming. He's too busy worrying about his wife. He trusts me completely. By the time the auditors figure it out, the Shell Corp will have dissolved and the money will be gone. We'll be ghosts." Sophia froze, her hand hovering over the desk. She didn't understand the financial jargon, tranche, Shell Corp, but she understood the language of deceit. "He trusts me completely." The words were cold and sharp. She knew Marcus was no friend to Elena, but she hadn't realized the depth of his treachery. She backed away slowly, her heart pounding. She had no proof, just a string of overheard words. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the real betrayal in this house had nothing to do with a community art center. The night of the Celestial Charity Gala arrived like a city holding its breath. A velvet black sky, pricked with the indifferent light of stars, stretched over a metropolis ablaze with anticipation. The gala was being held on the top floor of the newly completed Sterling Tower, 100 stories of glass and steel that was Richard's magnum opus. The ballroom was an architectural marvel, with panoramic windows offering a godlike view of the glittering city below. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the quiet, predatory hum of power. Richard stood at the epicenter of it all, a king in his court. He was magnificent. His tuxedo was tailored to perfection, his smile was blinding, and his confidence was a tangible force field. The Harrison deal was all but signed, and tonight was his victory lap. Investors clapped him on the back, politicians sought his ear, and rivals watched with thinly veiled envy. Marcus was a seamless extension of Richard, gliding through the crowd, his charm laying the groundwork for Richard's power plays. "Richard, the Secretary of Commerce is here. He wants a word about the waterfront development," he'd murmur, steering Richard towards another crucial conversation. He was the perfect second in command, loyal and ruthlessly efficient. "Where's Elena?" Marcus asked, his voice a low, concerned whisper in Richard's ear. "She's cutting it a bit close, isn't she? I hope she hasn't decided to make a scene." "She'll be here," Richard said, his jaw tightening, "and she will behave. I've made that perfectly clear." He had arranged for a car and a pre-selected, obscenely expensive gown to be sent to the penthouse. He envisioned her arriving cowed and defeated, a beautiful, silent accessory to be paraded on his arm. A final public display of his control before he discarded her. He stepped up to the podium on the main stage, the crowd falling into a respectful hush. Spotlights converged on him, bleaching the color from the room. "Friends, colleagues, partners," he began, his voice resonating with practiced charisma. "Tonight, we don't just celebrate a building. We celebrate a vision of a bold, prosperous future for our city." He spoke of growth, of ambition, of the relentless upward climb. Then, he gestured towards Marcus, who joined him on stage to a round of applause. "This vision isn't mine alone," Richard continued, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "It's one I share with my brilliant partner Marcus Vance. And it was Marcus who insisted that our success must be tied to a greater purpose. Which is why tonight, I'm proud to officially announce the creation of the Sterling Foundation's new charitable wing." He launched into the details of the foundation, a state-of-the-art community center, job training programs, scholarships for underprivileged youth. It was a masterpiece of public relations, crafted by Marcus to soften the hard edges of their corporate rating. The crowd was captivated, their applause echoing through the vast ballroom. This was the moment Richard had been working towards, not just a tycoon, but a philanthropist, a city father. It was then that the grand double doors at the entrance of the ballroom swung silently open. A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. A woman stood silhouetted against the light of the hallway. It was Elena, but it was not the Elena anyone expected. She was not wearing the glittering, jewel-encrusted gown Richard had sent. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored dress of deep charcoal gray. It was elegant but understated, a statement of quiet confidence, not extravagant wealth. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. Her face was luminous, her expression serene and purposeful. She wore no jewelry save for her simple wedding band. She didn't look like a defeated woman. She looked powerful. Heads turned, conversations faltered. She wasn't a spectacle of wealth, but her understated grace commanded more attention than any diamond. Richard froze at the podium, his speech dying on his lips. This was not submission. This was a declaration of war. A cold fury, mingled with a sliver of genuine shock, washed over him. How dare she, on his night, on this stage? He saw her eyes find his across the cavernous room. There was no anger in them, no fear, only a profound, sorrowful resolve. He started to move, to descend the stage and intercept her, to physically remove her from his moment of triumph. But she was already moving, walking with a calm, deliberate pace, not towards him, but towards the side of the stage where a second, smaller lectern with a microphone had been set up for guest speakers. A path seemed to part for her. The city's most powerful people, who had dismissed her as a non-entity just an hour before, now watched her, intrigued and silent. They sensed that the real event of the evening was about to begin. Marcus shot Richard a panicked look. "What is she doing? Richard, stop her!" But Richard was rooted to the spot, mesmerized by this stranger who was his wife. She reached the microphone, her hands steady. She looked out over the sea of stunned, curious faces. She took a deep breath, and the entire glittering world of Richard Sterling held its breath with her. The crisis had arrived, not with a scream, but with a quiet, unshakable poise that was more terrifying than any outburst. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was a heavy, expectant void, broken only by the distant, mournful cry of a siren rising from the city streets below. Elena stood at the lectern, the lights of the stage illuminating the quiet strength in her face. She looked not at Richard, but at the assembled crowd, the architects of the city's power. "Good evening," she began, her voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the vast space. It was a voice no one in that room, including her husband, had ever truly heard before. "My name is Elena Sterling. Many of you know my husband, Richard. You know him as a builder, a visionary." Richard, still frozen on the main stage, felt a hot flush of shame and anger. He started to signal for security, to have the microphone cut, but a strange, morbid curiosity held him in place. What could she possibly say? Expose their broken marriage? Accuse him of neglect? It would be embarrassing, but survivable. "My husband just spoke about his vision for the future and about his new charitable foundation," Elena continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. "It's a noble idea, to give back to the city, to help those less fortunate. But I've learned recently that sometimes, to truly help, you have to do more than just write a check. You have to listen. You have to see the people and places that have been left behind in the race to the top." Behind her, a massive screen that had been displaying the Sterling Enterprises logo flickered to life. It was not a corporate video. The first image was of the faded, peeling facade of the Northwood Community Arts Center. A gasp went through the crowd. "For the past month," Elena said, her voice now a narration over the images, "I have been spending my time here, in a part of the city some of you may not even know exists. It's a place without panoramic views or marble floors, but it is rich in something else: talent, creativity, and community." The screen filled with a short, beautifully shot documentary. It showed children with paint-smeared faces, their eyes bright with joy. It showed an elderly man, his hands gnarled with age, tenderly shaping a piece of clay. It showed Leo, his face earnest and passionate, speaking about the power of art to give a voice to the voiceless. The film was professional, poignant, and utterly captivating. Elena had used a portion of Richard's money not just on supplies, but on hiring a young, talented film crew she'd met through the center. "I was given a generous budget to prepare for this evening," Elena explained, her voice hardening slightly. "I was told to buy a new personality. Instead, I chose to invest in the ones I found here. We repaired the roof, bought a new kiln, and funded an after-school program for 50 children." The audience was mesmerized. This was not the bitter, scorned wife they had expected. This was a passionate advocate, a woman with a purpose. Richard watched, his anger slowly being replaced by a bewildering sense of confusion. This was not about him. This was something else entirely. Then, the tone of the presentation shifted. "But as I spent time in Northwood," Elena said, her voice dropping, becoming more serious, "I learned something troubling. I learned that the very site designated for the Sterling Foundation's new, much-publicized community center was the same site that this arts center and dozens of families were being evicted from to make way for it." A low murmur spread through the room. Richard felt a jolt, as if he'd been struck by lightning. He turned to look at Marcus, whose charming smile had vanished, replaced by a pale, rigid mask. "I thought it was a tragic irony," Elena continued. "A charitable project destroying the very community it was meant to serve. So I started looking deeper, and I discovered that the story was much uglier than that." The screen changed again. It now displayed a complex web of corporate documents, flowchart arrows connecting a series of numbered companies. "The land for the new center was purchased by Sterling Enterprises for $30 million, Elena said, her voice ringing with cold, hard clarity. "It was purchased from a holding company called Argent Properties. But what the board of Sterling Enterprises wasn't told is that Argent Properties had bought that same piece of land just 3 weeks prior for only $5 million. The murmuring grew louder. The investors in the room were now leaning forward, their faces grim. This was a language they understood all too well. "And who?" Elena asked, her voice dropping to a near whisper as she looked directly at Marcus for the first time. "Is the sole owner of Argent Properties?" She didn't need to answer. The final document flashed on the screen, an incorporation paper from an offshore account. And at the bottom, a clear, undeniable signature. Marcus Vance. The revelation landed like a bomb. The room erupted. Marcus had used Richard's own charitable foundation as a vehicle to defraud him, buying land on the cheap and selling it back to their own company at a 500% markup, pocketing a cool $25 million. The charity wing was a sham, a cover for the biggest deal of his life. Richard stared at Marcus, his mind struggling to process the betrayal. The years of friendship, the shared triumphs, the unwavering loyalty, it was all a lie. Marcus had been playing him, using his trust, his ambition, and even his failing marriage as a distraction. The paranoia he'd stoked about Elena, it was all a smokescreen. Marcus lunged for the microphone, his face a mask of desperate rage. "She's lying! This is a fabrication! The hysterical revenge of a bitter woman!" But Elena was prepared. "I thought you might say that," she said calmly. The final piece of evidence appeared. It was an audio file. Sophia, the quiet, invisible housekeeper, had taken a monumental risk. After overhearing Marcus's call, she had used a simple recording app on an old phone she'd hidden in Richard's office. The sound was tinny but clear. It was Marcus's voice, arrogant and triumphant from the call she had overheard. "He trusts me completely," Marcus's voice echoed through the ballroom. "By the time the auditors figure it out, the Shell Corp will have dissolved, and the money will be gone. We'll be ghosts." The silence that followed was deafening. It was over. The betrayal was complete, public, and undeniable. Marcus stood exposed, his charm stripped away to reveal the ugly greed beneath. He looked wildly around the room, at the faces of the people who had adored him minutes before, now staring at him with contempt. He saw Richard, whose face was a canvas of shock, devastation, and dawning soul-crushing realization. He had been betrayed by his best friend and saved by the wife he had cast aside. With a choked cry, Marcus turned and bolted, pushing through the stunned crowd, trying to flee the scene of his public execution. But security, alerted by a signal from Elena's small team, was already moving to block the exits. His escape was cut off. He was trapped in the ruin he had built. Richard didn't watch him go. He could only stare at Elena, who stood on the stage not in triumph, but with a look of profound, weary sadness. She had not done this for revenge. She had done it to reveal the truth. In saving his company from ruin, she had utterly destroyed his world. And in the wreckage, for the first time in years, he finally saw her. Weeks bled into a month of quiet, public ruin. The fallout from the gala was a media firestorm. Marcus Vance was entangled in a legal battle that stripped away his assets and his reputation, leaving him a pariah. The Celestial Tower project was stalled, mired in investigations. Richard Sterling's name, once a symbol of untouchable success, was now synonymous with scandal and a particular kind of blindness. He had lost millions, but what felt more significant was the loss of his own self-conception. The king had been deposed, not by a rival, but by his own colossal ignorance. He was adrift in the silent, cavernous penthouse. The staff had been let go, all except for Sophia, who came and went with a quiet dignity, her presence a silent reproach and a strange comfort. The chrome and glass that had once felt like armor now felt like a cage. He would stand for hours at the window, not looking at the skyline he had conquered, but at the empty space where Elena used to be. The whispers of the city's elite had faded, replaced by an echoing loneliness. His phone, once a relentless source of calls and demands, was mostly silent. The men who had clapped him on the back now crossed the street to avoid him. He was a cautionary tale. The great Richard Sterling, undone by a wolf he'd invited into his home, and a wife he'd refused to see. One gray afternoon, he found himself on the balcony. His eyes fell upon the neglected jasmine vine. He had never paid it any attention, considering it just another of Elena's sentimental follies. But now, as he looked closer, he saw it. Amidst the brittle, yellowing leaves, a single, tiny sprout of vibrant green was pushing its way towards the light. A stubborn, impossible sign of life. Hope, he realized with a pang of shame, was not a passive act. It was an act of survival. He knew what he had to do. He shed the expensive suit that felt like a costume and put on a simple pair of trousers and a worn sweater. For the first time in years, he didn't call for a driver. He took a taxi, the anonymity of the back seat a strange relief. He gave the driver the address for the Northwood Community Arts Center. The neighborhood was a revelation. It was alive, noisy, and colorful in a way his polished world never was. He saw kids playing on the sidewalks, heard music spilling from open windows, and smelled food cooking somewhere nearby. When he arrived at the center, he was struck by the change. The facade was freshly painted in a warm, welcoming ochre. Through the clean windows, he could see the space buzzing with activity. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The smell of turpentine and hope was stronger than ever. The place was transformed. The new kiln was firing pottery, the easels were all occupied, and the children's corner was overflowing with laughter and creativity. His money, filtered through Elena's vision, had done this. It was the best investment he had ever made, and he'd had no idea. Then he saw her. She was standing in the middle of the room, talking to Leo. A little girl, Maya, was tugging on her hand. Elena leaned down to listen to her, a smile of such genuine warmth and beauty on her face that it stole Richard's breath. She wasn't the pale, ghost-like figure from his parties, nor the sorrowful woman on the stage. This was Elena, alive, vibrant, home. She looked up, and their eyes met across the room. The laughter and noise of the center seemed to fade away. There was no triumph in her gaze, no, "I told you so." Just a quiet, searching look. He walked towards her, his heart pounding a nervous, unfamiliar rhythm. He felt like a foreigner in a land where he didn't speak the language. Leo gave him a wary, protective look, before Elena nodded, and the young artist moved away to give them space. "Elena," Richard said, his voice raspy. The grand, eloquent speeches he had given his entire life deserted him. "Richard," she replied, her tone even. He started, then stopped. An apology felt too small, too hollow for the scale of his failure. "What you did, you saved the company. You saved me from complete ruin." "I didn't do it for the company, Richard," she said softly. "And I didn't do it for you. I did it because it was the truth. And the people here," she gestured around the room, "deserved to have their truth told." He nodded, finally understanding. It had never been about him. "I know." He took a breath, the confession feeling like tearing down a building inside himself, brick by painful brick. "I was a fool. I was blind. I chased skylines and stock prices, and I missed everything that mattered. I missed you." Tears welled in his eyes, hot and shameful. He, who had never shown a moment of weakness, stood undone in the middle of a community art center. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he whispered, his voice cracking. "And I don't deserve you. But I want to help. Not with a check." He looked down at his own hands, soft and useless. "I want to learn how to build something real." Elena studied his face for a long moment, seeing the brokenness, the raw, painful sincerity that had been buried for so long. She saw a glimmer of the man she had first loved, the dreamer with fire in his eyes. Forgiveness was a complicated landscape, and trust was a bridge that, once burned, was not easily rebuilt. But she also saw that single green sprout on the jasmine vine. She didn't offer him an easy reconciliation. She didn't promise a return to their old life, a life neither of them wanted anymore. Instead, she offered something far more precious. A chance. She picked up a paintbrush from a nearby table and held it out to him. "The children are painting a new mural for the outside wall," she said, a faint, tentative smile touching her lips. "We could use another hand." Richard looked at the brush, then at her. He took it. His hand felt clumsy, but he held it tight. The final scene is not of a kiss, but of something more profound. Richard and Elena, standing side by side, painting a sprawling, colorful tree on a brick wall. Children laugh around them, adding their own handprints as leaves. In the distance, the setting sun casts a warm, golden glow over the city. The sharp, arrogant silhouettes of Richard's skyscrapers softened by the light. A new skyline was being created, not of steel and glass, but of community, connection, and second chances. It was the beginning of a new foundation, built not on wealth, but on worth. What defines us is not what we own, but what we choose to stand for.